The year was 1919. World War I had just ended. The U.S. Army was planning to send an 80-vehicle convoy across the country, using the first ever transcontinental highway in America for a dual mission. First, to see how military vehicles would handle the long-distance trip. Second, to give speeches to American citizens about how their brave soldiers helped win the war. They traveled along the Lincoln Highway, a route that connected New York City and San Francisco. Though they were traveling on the most famous road, sections of that road were absolutely horrendous. A trip that would take just 5 days today took them 62 days. On this grueling trip was the then 29-year-old Lieutenant Colonel Eisenhower. The eventual president quickly grew weary of the terrible roads he was traveling on, and it left a sour taste in his mouth. During the next World War, Eisenhower had achieved the status of Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces, a job which required him to figure out how to route traffic across Europe to get supplies to the soldiers moving towards Germany. He used one of Germany's most famous roads, the 4-lane superhighway known as the Autobahn, often considered to be the best road in the world. Later in life, Eisenhower would write, "The old 1919 cross-country convoy had started me thinking about good 2-lane highways. But Germany had made me see the wisdom of broader ribbons across the land. This was one of the things that I felt deeply about, and I had made a personal and absolute decision to see that the nation would benefit by it." But the unforeseen impacts of the highway system seemed to do the opposite of its creator's intention, dividing the nation when it was trying to pull it together. This is the Lightbulb Moment, a Cheddar and CuriosityStream original series. Building decent, long roads didn't become a focus until the early 1900s as cars became more affordable. In 1900, there were roughly 8,000 autos on the road. By 1920, there were 8.1 million cars and 1.1 million trucks. With the exponential growth of automotives in the early 1900s, people and goods were traveling farther and faster than ever before, and the idea of a highway gained traction.
There were many persons who were proposing not an interstate system, but a national system of highways with limited access, and that's really the key. So as early as 1909, for example, the Burnham Plan in Chicago showed a series of radial highways emanating from the downtown. The parkway system in New York State was in effect a statewide highway system. California was already building some limited access roads.
While these solutions were implemented statewide, transcontinental highways didn't take shape until 1913.
The Lincoln Highway was like the other American highways, partially well done, partially incomplete. A number of states in the 1910s and 1915s constructed what we call the Dixie Highway system, and that ran from northern Michigan all the way down to Miami.
This was a far cry from a national interstate system, but these were the first building blocks of connected, fast-moving freeways. At the time, every state had to allocate its own funds if they deemed it necessary to build a highway system through their state. This led to the ever-present question. Everyone wants great roads, but who's going to pay for them? One state's answer to this was the Oregon gas tax of 1911. This was the first tax of its kind.
The gasoline tax created an independent, new, fresh source of revenue for highway building. Up to that point, state and local governments financed highway construction from property taxes. And so non-motorists were still paying. The gasoline tax meant that only the users of the highways were paying for the roads that they were presumably going to get. By the late 1930s, there were about 1 million plus miles of roads in the United States.
With so many successful projects completed over the years, the demand for a nationwide interstate system was growing, both inside and outside the federal government. On the inside, there was Thomas Chief McDonald, an engineer and the Commissioner of Public Roads. McDonald spent a large portion of his career trying to get an interstate system passed.
And the other big impetus to building interstate highways was at the New York World's Fair of 1939, the Futurama exhibit. You look down below and you saw these interstate-looking highways running through cities, running out into the countryside, and this is what they said America would look like in 1960. By the end of the summer, millions of people had heard of this national highway system, and many of them had seen photographs of what it might come to look like.
And then, on December 7th, 1941,
we have witnessed this morning a distant view, a great battle off Pearl Harbor, and a severe bombing of Pearl Harbor by enemy planes, undoubtedly Japanese.
all progress on an interstate system came to a halt. Large-scale efforts to build a highway system wouldn't be made until Eisenhower took office in 1953. Eisenhower had lived through 2 world wars. He had seen how bad roads could make for a grueling experience, and how good roads could mobilize people and goods and literally save lives. Building a highway system and ensuring decent roads for the US of A was perhaps his greatest passion, and easily one of his greatest legacies. But there is one important thing to note when it comes to Eisenhower's involvement in the interstate.
Eisenhower didn't have any secret sauce for getting the interstate highway system passed. He was basically in the same position as Franklin Roosevelt or General Motors in Futurama or Thomas McDonald.
After the war ended in 1945, returning soldiers began starting families, and the population of the US began to boom.
The number of automobiles and trucks and buses on the street doubled from about 1946 to 1955. So there were traffic jams everywhere, terrible, deadly automobile accidents, people arriving late for work, products arriving late for manufacturing, and there was always an interest in highway building for economic development purposes.
And something else had changed. The new nuclear arms race coated the country in tension.
The atomic bomb is very dangerous. Since it may be used against us, we must get ready for it.
Soon, the Cold War took shape, which presented a new problem to American cities. How would they evacuate their citizens in the event of a nuclear strike? While this was absolutely top of mind with government officials, it has surprisingly little impact on the interstate system.
The argument was that when the Third World War began and the Soviet Union was bombing American cities, that if the interstate roads were located near downtown, then those highways would be obstructed from all the litter of the destroyed buildings. The Army also said, well, you don't want the highway in the Pacific too close to the Pacific coast because enemy ships will come up and they'll bomb the highway. They built the highway right along the coast. The interstate is located near downtown.
In 1956, the National System of Interstate and Defense Highways Act was approved by Congress and put forth by President Eisenhower. The 1956 law allocated $26 billion to the construction of 41,000 miles of interstate highways. The highway system was the largest-scale public works project ever proposed in the history of the United States. And with that came large-scale repercussions. At first, the country was enthralled by the idea of highways. The interstate connected people better than ever before. making drives from state to state speedy and direct. And because of that speed, it led to the growth of the suburbs, as well as a middle class who could travel into the city for work without having to live there full time. But for all the good it did, the interstate system also dealt an unfair level of cruelty to certain populations.
The original idea that McDonald's and others proposed was the interstates would demolish those neighborhoods and push those people out either toward the suburbs and then at the same time help restore traffic and business downtown. By the time the interstate was actually fully funded, 1956 and later, most of those neighborhoods were now occupied principally by African Americans, later by Latin American, Caribbean people. And so they were the people who were pushed out of neighborhoods. There was promise of public housing, but there was never public housing. And then public housing became racialized at the same time. African American people were stuck because African Americans lacked the ability, because of racial segregation in America, to move out to the suburbs.
This negative impact wasn't just felt by the divided urban neighborhoods, but also by the cities that the interstate passed right by.
When the interstate system bypassed a town, that town's economy mostly withered because the tourists on whom they had relied just no longer stopped there.
The interstate played a massive role in the post-war growth of the American economy and allowed for a level of individual mobility never seen before. However, we might never be able to fix all the problems that the highway system has caused. The best we can do is be aware of them while striving to carry out its creator's original intention, connecting with each other. And in that regard, the interstate can help us do just that. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell for notifications. You can watch full 22-minute episodes every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern on Cheddar's live network or anytime on CuriosityStream.